would be okay. So welcome to the Art of Pricing. Today we are going to talk about acquisition strategies and how this can, how this goes to sustainable, consistent growth, period. And when we look at growth, growth is in your inventory, growth is in your revenue, and growing the right way. So today we are joined by Brian Riggs, the co-founder of Vintory, which is the only platform in CRM to help with inventory growth. And also we have Michael from AvantStay. He has been with AvantStay since they started. So, somebody, two individuals who have seen growth in, many different ways, right? And when Jed starts, Jed comes on with us, Jed actually works with Vintory, and he's in, like I said, he's in Hawaii. He's opening another market in California somewhere.
Yeah.
So we have some great perspectives of everything coming in, yet another topic that is mind blowing. And we could go on forever about. So, where I want to get started today is welcome, guys.
Hey, great seeing you. Great seeing
Yeah,
y'all.
great seeing you guys. I just saw Brian in person a week and a half ago, so it's just we're getting back to normal over here, guys. So yeah, let's get started. So whenever somebody says, Brian, somebody comes to you and is like, I need to work on my acquisition strategy, what are like the first things that pop in your head?
Well, I always want to find out, and first off, again, thanks for having us. This is fun. So informal, the way it should be. Just talking here, right? Folks within the industry. So, but going back to your question, all right, so when folks come to us and say, hey, we need help with our growth strategy, our inventory acquisition strategy, I think my first question is always, well, what are you doing now? And guess what? The answer is, well, not much. We might do a postcard here or there. We've got a realtor referral scenario. We do owner referrals, but it's here or there. And so sometimes you hear about some of these wildly successful plays that some companies have, but for the most part, it's something that everybody understands that is very important, but where's the bandwidth to really address it, right? So especially when you're dealing with the guest and guest experience and the house and the weather and all these other things that are going on. Owner acquisition typically is something that's extraordinarily important, but yet not front of mind. So my point is that we'll always ask, hey, what are you doing now? All right, well, first step we need to do is we need to figure out just how do we address the bandwidth issue. So what can we do to make sure, and that's part of what we do here, is how can we put together campaigns that are effective and run them in the background so that you have leads that are coming to you, owners that are coming to you guys, that are calling in and asking for your services. So I mean that's overall certainly what we look to accomplish. But I think that's always the first step. Let's kind of understand that, and then also, and I like to get Michael's take on this too. What are your goals? Michael and them are in several markets and do different things. So what are your goals as far as growth? And that looks, again, that takes many different shapes and forms. We have some folks that say they're at 50 properties, they want to get to 100. We have some folks that are at 50 properties and maybe in 3 years they want to exit out. Okay, well, let's back into what that needs to be so you can name your number. Another great use case is in fact, I can think of a few partners now. Hey, we're at 100 properties. We don't really want to get above 100 properties, but what we'd love to do is we'd love to have the ability to add like our top 10% type performers to our inventory, and we purge out our bottom 10% so that over time, year over year, our gross booking revenue and our margins goes way up, but yet our overhead is staying pretty stagnant. That's a big use case we see a lot of folks for. And then also, hey, we're in market A, we want to expand to market B. We find this, this is really, really hot right now. And we want to utilize Vintory to help us, burst into this new market. So that's, and certainly with Jed, something we can talk about as well. Anyway, so that's just a couple of takes on it.
I love that. Welcome, Jed.
Hey guys, how you doing?
We told everybody that you were excused for being late, so you don't have to worry about that. It made me think
that.
My old band director in high school would always say, if you're not on time, you're late.
Yep.
I was thinking about that in my head. Well, we were just like going over with Brian, whenever you think about acquisition strategies, like what are the first things that come to your head? And really, whenever what my takeaway from everything that you just said, Brian, is there's some simple things that are hard to articulate sometimes, right? Like,
Sure.
what are you doing today, right? Like, I think that is a definition that as a property manager, you need to write down, and you really need to be aware of what you're doing today. What are your goals, and letting everyone in your team know what your goals are, right? Because you're right, it's a completely different world if you're expanding into a new market, want to double your inventory, or want to continue with the same amount of inventory you have today, just increase your revenue. Because you mean once you're at 100 properties, right? Like, to scale for every 10 more properties, you kind of need like another employee, right? So like there are different factors that go in there. So what if you can keep revenue, increase your revenue with what you already have? And then obviously like mergers and acquisitions and going into new markets like you are, Jed. So, you just jumped in. We're going to put you on the hot seat, and then we'll go to Michael. What this idea of you wanting to go into a new market, like how did that go into your acquisition and revenue strategy?
I think what happened was we had a major shutdown in Kauai. So, it was the idea that,
I'm just
yeah, no kidding. Yeah. If you hadn't heard, Kauai had a rough time there for about a year. No, so, I mean, it was kind of the confluence of a couple of different issues. One of them being that, we were struggling in Kauai. The other being that it made sense for me in my life to kind of jump into this full time and have this be my only occupation. And I'd always been concerned about doing that in a space where, there's an island that can be hit by hurricanes, it can be hit by other things. Nobody saw the pandemic coming, but it very much played into my overall thought process that I didn't want to have all my eggs in one basket. So it made sense at that point, being that Newport Beach is a drive-to market, it didn't have the same kind of shutdown. We thought, all right, now it's a good time to kind of diversify and start to build up another business in another area. So that's kind of what led to going into a different market.
That makes sense. And I hear this all the time, and I'm sure Michael can, add on to that. Like, I was talking to someone this morning, who they are in Europe, and how, a big part of their goals today is diversifying their portfolio, and not necessarily by markets, right? They had more urban, which is another
Right.
thing that kind of got boxed in. So having more countryside. Michael, I'd love to hear your input on everything everybody said. And also, one thing that we said yesterday was, you know, the hardest piece of the struggle with growth is supply and demand, right? So, tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I think especially with what we're trying to accomplish, which is having consistent branded assets throughout our whole portfolio, to provide a consistent experience for both the guests and the homeowners. So that comes into play because some markets you might not have the exact property profile that kind of fits within what we're trying to do. So we've taken a hybrid approach. So we have your lease to lease model where we're capturing the arbitrage between long-term rents and then short-term rentals. And then as we go into new markets, I think the Southeast is a great example of cities and markets where folks are using their properties as a second home and a vacation home versus a investment property, which you see more traditionally in California and on the West Coast. So, we have to be flexible and nimble and take this hybrid approach. But what that allows us, and one of our value adds is, we have this awesome brand that we're building. And people on the managed side, they see us as, we're not trying to build a fee income business, right?
Mm-hmm.
And nothing against it. It's great profit, rep margin, but I think that's we set out to accomplish building experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, kind of this hybrid approach that we've taken, and we're fortunate enough to raise some investor capital, so that we do have the balance sheet to go and take on these lease obligations. It's allowed us to create, kind of this awesome branded, consistent portfolio, that I think over time will continue to kind of sell itself and be a stronger point for us as we go to new owners, and
Totally.
investors.
I think that everyone can agree here, and you hear this often in conferences also as well. There's a consistent brand of growth, national brand that's being grown in different aspects of everything, and then also people love the local on the grounds. What that is, and y'all, everyone falls under Avant Stay. I'm assuming, Jed, this property, this company that you're acquiring think about acquiring like in the new market, it's not going to be called Koloa Kai. So
Right.
you're going more like the local approach of like the
Mm-hmm.
keeping the names and that brand, but then having consistent strategies in there. Brian, one thing I was just thinking of whenever Mike was talking is, do y'all have, when the strategies that people come and say like, hey, I only want to work with second home owners or I only want to work with investors? Do you see that ever?
Well, we do. I think it all starts with, again, we go back to the goals. All right, what are your goals as far as
Sure,
growth?
goals.
Yeah, so from that perspective, the question is, hey, if you had 10 more properties, could you fill them up? Well, in today's age, yeah, we could. So now the big emphasis, of course, is supply or that growth, if you would. So we really want to start, all right, well, what are the properties that make sense to you and how does that work? Are you able to service them? Are they in the right location? Do they have the right amenities? So you kind of start there because then you can kind of back into what you feel the gross booking revenue or what this property, how it performed for you. And then also, both of these guys on the call, they have great brands. And so owners love to be able to buy into a brand name. They get it because they understand what they're going to have. So when you couple that with some technology and great communication and so forth, that makes a very compelling offer. And that's definitely one of the things, when we talk about here at Vintory, we coach everybody on really to understand that so that you can put your best foot forward with regards to how to put that brand out there. We have writers on our team that actually we go through an onboarding process. We synthesize that stuff and then we write that story out, if you would, because again, it's very owners to look for that. So it really it starts with the types of properties. What are your ideal targets out there from a property perspective? And then when you start having these conversations with the owners, now you can go through some personas. And so is it what we call a first time Frank? Is it a competitor Steve? Is it a RBO Ruby? We've got all these different personas out there built. So then when you can recognize them and understand, all right, well here's how I can communicate and what they're really interested in, that's specific to what their needs are. Yeah.
Right. And I'm sure if so there's like the persona on the owner, right? And then there's the persona on the manager too, right? Like I'm sure there's a lot of consulting and advice and handholding that everyone on this call has had to give to people. I'm sure, the owners who are, the hosts are excited. They've been managing their own property for the first and it's for a while and realize there's just like this business of vacation rental revenue management where they can create every property out there. They can just start doing revenue management and having to advise them on, hey, like maybe have your goals and the personas of the people you want so that later you don't have to fire owners in there. And I think that some people don't think about, that at the very beginning because it's that excitement, right? You're an adrenaline rush. You're like, I can do it all in there. I'm trying to think where I was going with that. Sorry.
I have a point on that
Yes.
with Brian, and I think as we're scaling a nationwide brand, and you think about how we're going into these new markets, we don't want this cookie cutter feel, right? The same, kind of stale brand across each market, and we lean into the local market, the local aesthetic, the local feel. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really important for us for our messaging. We don't want to go into Tahoe or like a Pigeon Forge and have this updated modern furniture, right? We really want to lean into kind of the local aesthetics that folks are used to, not only the guests but the owners have been. So that's something that we keep in mind, and I've seen some of these new age property managers that they sometimes lose sight of it. Right? Not everything has to be, high tech, 100% automated, right? It just really needs to embody the atmosphere and the environment.
Have character, right? I think that I completely can get that, right? Because, I go to New Orleans for work and fun all the time. And I'm from Louisiana, so I don't really care about the character. You can put me in wherever you are. But when I'm on a beach location, like I like to feel like, like a beachy house. Like I don't want to just be in like a concrete studio with, white couches and everything on there. So I totally get that. That makes a lot of sense. But Jed, I wanted to ask you, so, since you're working with Vintory and everything and you had a cool story, like what made you realize that you needed some help with your acquisition side of things?
Well, it really started when I sat down and figured out, number one, we needed to grow. So I sat down and thought through logically, and my engineering background makes me kind of think things through in a logical way. And I said to myself, what do I think would be a really effective strategy for growth? And I listed out all the different things. Direct marketing is part of it, email is part of it, outreach to local realtors is part of it. All the different factors that I could think of, not being a marketing guy or a sales guy. And so I had this playbook and I tried to execute on it for probably 6 to 8 months. I couldn't get my team behind it. I just couldn't get the bandwidth, and it's just not what we were good at. It's not our specialty. So I happened to catch a podcast or an interview between Matt Landau and Brooke Faust of Vintory. And, Brooke was explaining how he at Vantage and then at Vintory had created this program around, here's what we do to build, and it's a system. It's not a willy-nilly kind of, we're going to try some stuff and see what sticks. I mean, it's a system. So that appealed to me in a big way. And he went down and literally just ticked off all of my boxes. And then when he got to the bottom, when he started to talk about data analytics and some of those data tools that I wasn't using at all, I thought, okay, this has not only got everything that I needed to cover, but it's got more in there too. So like I was saying, a little bit before, I called up Brian and basically walked right into him, sold, and said, all right, where do I need to sign? So it became, I knew from doing my own research that they had all the stuff that needed to happen, and they had done it in the past, which kind of validated for me that it was not a bad idea, all the things I was thinking about. And then that they had done it, I was like, okay, I need to be part of this. So
totally. Yeah. And
understanding that and having a plan is kind of what led me to Vintory.
I love that story, right? It's a simple story, but it's the same thing that we hear all the time in this industry, right? Like you have an idea of where you want to go and what you want to do, but the execution and the bandwidth is extremely hard. And the bandwidth is even harder today, right? Just with so many, open jobs in our industry, or in the service industry in general, right? Not having enough people to fill all these roles. So like execution even gets harder. And this is one of those things that we always hear in the industry, right? Is what do we think can be consolidated in the industry? We have all these different assets and different areas of things, but I think we don't have any one size fits all solution in our industry. And it's even been proven more that when it comes to execution, whether it's revenue management, acquisition, operations, cleaning,
operations, property, it's all of it, right?
You have to have somebody responsible to execute upon it, right? Because otherwise it falls down the wayside. With that being said, Mike, I want to ask you, how often are y'all reviewing your acquisition strategy? Is this you have acquisition team? What does it look like for you guys?
So we have the underwriting team, which I manage, and that's a few analysts that are just consistently looking at properties on a daily basis.
Numbers,
and we're fortunate enough to have, like I mentioned, the lease model and the traditional property management model. And now we've looked at acquiring companies. So we've acquired 2 companies to date, and a couple more in the works. And that's just kind of allowed us to really grow our footprint. And we're looking at acquisition targets that could give us immediate density in a market, or are complementary to our existing footprint and fit within our brand. So aside from our supply marketing team, we do have our inside sales team and some field sales folks. We're looking at every single route you could go to right now, and staying nimble without taking into that mindset of growth at all cost. We've remained disciplined pretty much to date, and I think that's a big reason why we've been successful.
So I think if I can just chime in there's a ton of awesome clues there for everybody. I think number one, to Michael's point, and Michael and Sean with Yvonne have done an amazing job, but they know their numbers. Right. So Brooke has a blog post called Know Thy Numbers. It's huge. Do you understand what's the lifetime value of adding a new property to your inventory?
So
truly know what that means. So, but everything does start with data. And I hate to say that because I know a lot of folks, what does data mean? It means bandwidth. It means analytics. It means being able to take a time. It probably lines directly up with Jed. Jed loves that, right? But to that point, you need to understand what are your targets in your market. So if I'm coaching anybody, I say, all right, what properties in your current market now where you have a footprint or you're looking to have a footprint do you want to go after? Let's identify those. And I think that both Jed and Michael, their teams do an amazing job of knowing that, because guess what? Those are the ones where you want to spend your money to market towards. Instead of just dropping flyers out of a blimp, right? You want to be more targeted. And I'd rather get, so if you're going to do, say, I don't know, 6,000 touches, if you would, 6,000 pieces of marketing, whatever it may be, digital or email or direct mail, stuff like that. I'd rather 1,000 targets get 6 pieces versus, one 6,000 group, if you would, just get touched once, because it's not going to work. So it's got to be that top of mind, tip of tongue type of play. Consistency is key here. So, but what does it start with? It starts with data. I mean, that's why, we have a full data analytics team of 5 data scientists, and that's all they do is data. So that would be one piece of coaching I would tell, is really start to understand your market and which properties you want to go after. Have you identified a top 10, a top 20, a top 100? Because those are ones you want to spend some effort on.
Yep. Data goes into, everything. And that's where, if data is overwhelming you at the moment, that's where you look for advice and help and talk to everybody on this call to help just basically get your mind, your mind right on what you need to, what you need to do moving forward. And, I know one thing that we talked about yesterday, and it's even a bigger thing today now, like, how do we attack these, not attack, but, get in front of like communication gaps with having like a team who's looking at the data, a team who's locally trying to get acquisition. Like how are those communications working in a world where not everybody's going to be in an office anymore and probably never will be again, right? I think we're finding it easier to virtually communicate. And so we'll probably keep more boots on the ground than we did before. So like, what kind of, advice do you give to, bring teams together?
Well, I can hop in here real quick. We're 100% remote at Vintory, so I guess with what's happened over this past year, it wasn't that impactful. But what we found with our partners is that, of course, they've been forced to be a heck of a lot more remote, to say the least. And so I think it's just a new norm. There's a comfortability of not having to be everybody in a cubicle in an office, if you would. So just simple, different types of communications tools, whether it be, I know internally we use Slack and things like that so we can stay abreast of things. But at the end of the day, over communication is always the best type of play.
Document, right? I was in HR right out of college. Jed, do you have somebody on the ground in Newport Beach? Like, how is that going to work for you?
Well, so I'm the guy on the ground in Newport Beach. So I live and work in Newport Beach primarily, and then we go to Kauai on a quarterly basis. I have people on the ground in Kauai.
Okay.
So I do have an employee that's a full-time employee there, and then we've got teams that we manage. And it's funny because the two different things that we mentioned just in the last 5 minutes resonated. Just on the data front, I'll circle back to that for a second. The one person that I talk to every single week at Vintory, it's not my partner success manager, it's not Brian, it's not Brooke. I talk to the data guy, Paul. I talk to our guy, Paul, every single week. We've got a standing meeting, and that's the guy that I make sure that I'm in touch with, because as much as you think you know a situation with data, you need to check it and reevaluate on a regular basis. So I totally underscore that point of, like Brian said, not only I love the data, but number two, it's really impactful and it's important to stay engaged on regularly. As far as working remote, it's one of those things that kind of like Vintory, where they set up to be remote. We started the company in Kauai, living in California. So we were already kind of predisposed, exactly, to figuring out all the ways to work. And I don't know that there's ever going to be a single silver bullet to communication, but what we're doing now, with Zoom, it's been that much easier. Texting, you've got multiple platforms across, you've got Slack, you've got all these different things. I think that from a small business perspective, those tools have never been more available to us. To use them and to take advantage of them. And I use every single thing I can get. I'll call my maintenance guy on the phone. I text with my cleaners. I'll chase down other people through apps and everything like that. And it's being really comfortable and conversant in multiple technologies to be able to talk to anybody wherever they happen to be. Because at a certain point, you need to go to where the work is. And if that's on the
Diversifying
ground,
technology
yeah,
platforms for communication. I mean,
exactly.
diversify homes and
Yeah,
communication. That, yeah, I mean,
exactly. So from our perspective, that setup has been really helpful.
and Mike, I was wondering for you guys. So when y'all open a new market, are you usually finding an operator who is familiar with the area and the industry, or are y'all like having someone from that's already on the team maybe go on the ground to build that team?
So we'll build a team out. So we have a cadenced approach, and we'll look at each market before entering it, and we'll look at, what do we think we could get realistically in 1, 3, and 6 months, in terms of properties on board. And if that checks off from that point, and it's fully compliant market, then we'll start building out the team. So the team is pretty much ramped up by the time, we're bringing on these homes.
Yeah.
And I think one piece on the supply that I'd missed on earlier, and I haven't touched on this, I like to call them uncut gems. So there's a ton of properties that might not be hospitality optimized, might not be, kind of their living design, right? But you need to think of creative structures with some of these owners, and show what the upside and value you could provide is. And if it's, waiving a few months of management fee, right? If they're willing to put some furniture upgrades in the home, and, entering in that relationship early on, that this is, it's a mutually beneficial, kind of relationship when we're aligned on our goals. We're not here to just kind of make money on you 24/7. We want to make money together. And if you could get some investment up front in maybe some of these properties that do need a little elbow grease, it could really pay off. It can, because you're also starting from a lot lower bench point. And once they see that revenue with a little investment capital, even if you don't have it 100% optimized, you're still doing much better than where they were before. So that really does help if you could get folks on board with that. And it's a tricky street too, because you don't want to sound presumptuous and say, hey, the design looks awful, right? But that is definitely a solid point, a piece of
I totally
scaling a
agree
business.
with you there. And, I think a lot of people would agree with you, but I mean, I was on the listing optimization side at HomeAway for a very long time. And I mean, with owners and having to talk to owners, and they'd say, why, I had, beers with my neighbor last night down the road, and they're making like, almost double the revenue I'm making. I'm like, well, let's take a look at the listings. And I mean, it was so, it was hard and it was eye-opening, but I would pull up listings, screen share with them side by side, and I was like, you tell me what's catching your eye. And honestly, what I would tell owners, and I think this is a great practice for everyone, is it was like, when you have like a family gathering or friends or people together, or just text everybody, let's use communication and technology. I want you to ask everyone around you, what are their favorite factors of the other listings? Don't even put them on your listing. Tell them to choose their top listings, what brought them to the listings, and what, do your own test study with your group of people in different demographics. Your little niece or your cousin, that's a teenager, your grandma. Like there's so much so much resources and feedback you can give just by asking people questions. So I love that. So it's 11:30, but I do want to give everybody a chance to give their last minute advice. Jed, let's start with you.
I just say, have a plan, know what your goals are. And I mean, I think that's going to be the same as everybody's going to say, but it's really the right advice, is understand what your goals are and then come up with a plan, especially when you're a small guy. I'll speak to all the small guys out there. You can't do it without a plan. You got to have consistency. You got to be out there, and it's got to be, you've got to represent yourself as a real company. And if you're not doing it consistently with high quality, you're not doing that. So whether it's, bringing on a great company like Vintory or trying to do it yourself, come up with a plan and figure out a way to execute on it regularly with high quality.
This is not a fly by the seat topic.
It's really not.
It's not. Brian, what about you?
Yeah, thanks for the consistency piece, because I was going to say the same thing. Again, a good plan executed is better than a perfect plan never executed, right? So just get something in play that's consistent. I think the other thing is what we found, and again, I think we should do a part 2 to this, because I'd love to hear Jed and Michael's comment on this. But what we found in our case studies and all of our use cases is that you need to be hyper responsive. If an owner reaches out and they're asking for your management, guess what? They're going to call 2 or 3 other companies. Whoever's the first one to respond has an exponentially higher probability of getting that deal, right? That doesn't mean it's a match for you. I love what both of these guys say. They both say no. I'd love to find out how much they tell somebody no. Not you're not exactly a fit for us. I love that. Not being afraid to say that, but being hyper responsive is so key right now. And so I would just encourage everybody to look at a little bit of automation on that front, to see what you can do to help out with that. So,
Totally.
yeah.
Mike.
I would say, just talk to as many people as you can. Even if it's competitors, I've heard a bunch of different numbers float out, but you're thinking of a $100 billion plus industry, right? And there's enough skin in the game for everyone. So I've pinged folks at other companies, other competitors, just asking them about this, and vice versa, right? So I think it's just kind of keep the lines of communication going, especially with a nascent industry that's growing quickly. There's going to be a lot of people that come out very successful from it. So I would just kind of talk to as many folks as possible.
That is one of my favorite things about this industry, is that we create friendly competition. And you can see that through our conferences, through webinars, through emails, like all the, no matter if everyone is doing the same thing to the same goal, like lifting the vacation rental industry up. So don't be afraid to talk to your competitors and have fun with them. And I talk to many property managers who say like all their competitors get together like once a month. And they share stories and they share ideas that they talk to vendors. I mean, it really is such an enlightening thing. And everyone in this industry is very social too. So they all want to have a conversation. But thank you guys so much for joining me today. I agree. I think that we can totally make a part 2. So we're all going to get together on what we can talk about on that. If anyone who has joined today, we'll probably have the recording back by tomorrow. And out next week. So if you have any questions, I'm sure Michael, Brian, or Jed would be more than happy to talk to you. And thank you for joining today, everyone. Have a great Wednesday.
Thanks, guys.
Thank
See
you.
y'all.
Bye.